college Raz or police, what's the most memorable event you've had with college freshmen? Got a duty call from a worried mom one Saturday afternoon. She hadn't heard from her 18-year-old daughter in a few days and wanted someone to check on her. Sure, I said. I go and knock on her door. She's there, just studying. She promises to call her mom. Next day the student died. She got very sick, called a friend, went to the hospital, and was dead in a matter of hours. I wasn't the last person to see her alive, but I might have been the last to see her healthy. Years later, I can't shake the feeling that her mom had some sort of premonition. Not an rat or a cop. Last year my school decided to set up a beehive research setup on a recently closed porch to one of the dining halls. This setup wasn't protected at all from stupid students. One night, a few smart people decided to go up to the beehives, take one, and throw it into a nearby dorm's elevator. They then proceeded to press every button so that the elevator would stop on every floor in the building. Whole dang building had to be evacuated. Said people were expelled. A girl delivered a baby in her dorm room and claimed she didn't know she was pregnant. To make matters worse, it was a Catholic all-girls school and the baby was delivered by the biology teacher who was a nun. A similar story to that, during freshman orientation, at a Catholic university as well, a girl gave birth right in the middle of the second floor dorm lobby. She said she didn't know she was pregnant. I was once notified by one of my residents that her mattress had been misplaced and she wanted to know if she would be charged for it or if she was good. I told her she would most certainly be charged for it, and then, mysteriously, the mattress reappeared the week before summer closing. I heard through the paper-thin door of her room later that it had been at a frat house for a while, and I dreaded the thought of what happened to it. A guy in my corridor lost his mattress one afternoon. It was found in a tree. Very first night on call by myself, watching the news in my dorm room. See my resident's mugshot. The housing staff were unclear on the procedure of what to do when a resident is arrested for murder. Former Ra here. I have two. Same group of guys who regularly congregated in the room above mine. It was a 2-story townhouse style dorm. 2:30 am. Ish. In the morning I'm woken up by loud yelling and cheering accompanied by what sounds like someone attempting to smash a hole through my ceiling with a sledgehammer. I storm upstairs a bit scared of what I might find. It was 6 completely sober 18-year-olds cheering on their angrily Boston Irish Catholic friend as he danced a jig in steel-toe work boots. It was too ridiculous to even be mad. I told them to shut up and went back to bed. 2. One night I was hanging out with the guys and we were watching something on TV. One of the owners of the room went to bed while everyone was still hanging out in his room. Fast forward like 40 minutes. He sits straight up in his lofted bed, lets out a long high-pitched giggle and shouts, "It's a titty," and then passes back out. I hope I made their freshman year as fun as they made my senior year. I used to catch people playing possum all the time. Basically a bunch of students would climb a tree and drink until they started falling out. Last person in the tree wins. Found a couple idiots having lightsaber fights once. They'd unscrewed the fluorescent tubes and were having sword fights with them. One time a whole floor got scabies and were running back and forth from the laundry room washing every single item of clothing and linen they had. One resident was hiding a homeless person in the TV room. Residents were welcome to have friends on site and they were also welcome to stay in the TV room and the rec center after lockup. They just had to pull the door closed after themselves when they left. This guy was staying in the TV room with his homeless friend until the Ras finished their rounds, locking him in the TV room, going back and sleeping in his own room and then waking up early to go back to the TV room before the Ras came around in the morning unlocking everything again. I woke up around midnight one night because people were firing Roman candles at one of the buildings. We were having problems with some local kids who kept playing pranks on the residents and naturally I assumed it was them. So I called campus security to deal with it and they ended up rounding up my own residents. After I gave them all write-ups, one of them asked me why I didn't tell them beforehand that they weren't allowed to set fireworks off on campus. Not my haul, but still pretty memorable. The Ras from one of the other residences on campus came to us with one of their problems. They kept finding human feces outside one of their buildings and assumed it was one of our residents playing pranks on them. Completely reasonable. We had a weird group that year. I told him that I would keep an ear out. When it kept happening, one of their RAs had a stakeout and saw the feces being dropped out of one of the windows. Turns out this resident was setting toilet paper down on his bedroom floor, crapping on it and dropping it out the window because he didn't want to use the hall's bathrooms. On the final night in the halls, I found a room of people each pouring a beer directly into the carpet for their friends who had left uni before the semester finished. Best 2 years of my life. After Thanksgiving break, all of the peepholes had been stolen from every door on the second floor. Apparently they just twisted right out and somebody needed a collection. International kid went to the fish market. They bought live crabs and lobsters, then proceeded to keep them in the fridge drawer alive for days. Safe to say the vegetarians and the vegans refused to use the fridge, and it caused so much grief and drama. A long time ago, group of freshmen in a 4-man suite got permission for a pet somehow from the housing office. They didn't specify it was a freaking pig. The smell was unbelievable. That lasted a couple of weeks until the dean of students finally gave me and the housing office the power to threaten expulsion. Kid got kicked out of his fraternity and had to move into campus housing. A few weeks later he stunk up the whole hall because he was smoking a bong in his room. I wasn't a jerk, so I usually just told them how obvious it was, and to do it somewhere else so they don't get caught by someone who cared more than me. Well, when I went in, I found easily more than $100K worth of prescription drugs, weed, coke, and alcohol. Dude was obviously running an operation out of his dorm, so we had to call the cops, and now I have the title for biggest drug bust in university history. I guess 22 Jump Street was actually based off of you. I have a couple. Resident was giving another resident a BJ. He says he's going to CM. Ends up peeing in her mouth. She doesn't spit it out immediately, opting to instead run down 2 flights of stairs, outside, and onto the lawn to spit it out. Everyone knew. She was pretty chill about it. Same summer. Boy versus girls pranks in the bathroom. Girls turned it up a notch and took a bunch of pads, tampons and ketchup and went ham in the boys' bathroom. It was all fun, except for one very shy boy who it made very uncomfortable and complained to me. Last, as a freshman orientation leader, we have like a serious time where the new students can get things off their chest, talk about stresses, things they're scared about going into college, or the weekend in general. Most kids often talk about being excited, having a good weekend, being discriminated against, coming out, etc. Generally manageable topics. One kid ends up confessing that he is seriously depressed and would actually beat both of his parents. No amount of training prepares you for that. Utter silence for literally 3-5 minutes. Luckily one of my fellow staffers found something extremely caring and comforting to say. Don't remember what she said. I was just glad that someone was talking. My first year as an RA, I had 3 students on suicide watch. 2 of them left and the third ended up out of the funk he was in. There is little training that can prepare you for being told that you have to keep eyes on a kid who may kill himself. Forget about trying to know how to connect with them when their stuff is happening. I went to a small liberal arts school in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, in mountains and forest. You could store your hunting rifle or bow at the police station, and, during certain times of the year, hunt on the larger 13,000-acre campus. One of the infamous boys' dorms layout was 2 doubles connected by a bathroom. I wasn't the RA for this dorm, but I heard about it in one of the larger meetings. Apparently, the head RA received a complaint because one guy's suitor had shot and killed a deer and hung it in the shower so he could skin and butcher it. Blood was everywhere. Okay, so I was only in RA for 1 semester, but my top 2 stories are: one time 3 of my residents were in the elevator and 2 of them decided to jump and set off the sensors, so they were trapped in the elevator. I was on duty so I had to deal with it. I didn't know what to do so I called the hall director on duty, who called the repairman. The repairman said he would be there in an hour. so I had to be there waiting, keeping an eye on the situation. So me and some friends of the people stuck grabbed lawn chairs, snack and filled our Yeti cups and tailgated the event. When the hall director on duty showed up, she saw we had it handled and were enjoying ourselves, so she joined the fun and started singing hello from the other side to the kids in the elevator. The other memorable event was, one night a couple of my residents bought ghost peppers to try and see who could handle the heat. Well, one kid who was Thai said my food is way spicier than this, eats one whole, and starts another when the heat sets in. We had ranch and tortillas ready for people to eat to cool down. After everyone was done eating, me included, we are just hanging out in the lounge. The kid who had been cutting up the peppers went to bed before us, and his room is right next to the lounge. About 5 minutes after he went to bed, we hear him screaming. Apparently he didn't wash his hands and had started jerking off. He was in a lot of pain, so we threw him a bottle of ranch and left the room so he could apply it to his area. Then the rest of us washed our hands very thoroughly. RA and campus ends here. I have had many encounters with drunk IETC freshmen, but I have a couple I will never forget. One of them was during my first year as an RA, living on the 4th floor of my building. I woke up to knocking on my door at around 3 AM coupled with the screaming of "there's people freaking in my bed." Alright, I guess I better not ignore this one. So I head out and see this freshman who reeks of alcohol and stumble towards his room. Plot twist, he doesn't live there and the two students half closed open the door. I send him off and go back to bed to be woken up again 15 minutes later by more knocking. Guess who is back? In one hand he has a water bottle and in the other he has a trimmer in the other hand. Now I'm 6'4" and he's pretty tiny, so it did not end well when he tried to shave my beard. Ended up tossing him back in his room onto his bed and finally got to go to bed. Not an RA but a first-hand witness. My freshman year of college I lived in a building with super long hallways and went to school in central PA. The 2 days that we were affected by Hurricane Sandy, 2012 I think, and by affected I mean severe rain and higher than normal winds. Classes were cancelled and we were told not to leave the dorms unless it was an emergency. So what happens when 400 plus boy college kids are forced to stay indoors? Start a multi-floor jousting tournament. Each contestant had to sit on a skateboard and try to knock their opponent off their skateboard while being pushed at pretty decent speeds. Was definitely one of the best unofficial freshman icebreakers I've participated in. Sadly got busted not too long after people started yelling war cries down the hallways. I have two really memorable RA experiences. Purdue late 90s. The first is a really terrible one. I was in RA at the same time as Jay Severson. Jay was shot and killed by a resident that was a big drug dealer. It shook Purdue heavily, but especially the RA. Were actually called counselors. Community. The other, me specific. One was a freshman who had a father that was super hard on him. One night I came back to the dorm and he's in the hall with a bottle of Jack. Just hammered. Purdue dorms are dry, but I told him just get rid of it and go to bed. 5 minutes later he walks to my room with the bottle and I told him I have to write this up now. I never wrote people up. He then just breaks down. Snot tears breakdown. He was planning to kill himself that night, so I spent the next 2 hours talking to him and convinced him to see someone professional the next morning. He passed out in my room and in the morning he called a real professional and began therapy. I didn't write him up for alcohol. Had to tackle my roommate and call the cops so he didn't jump off the roof in first year. Held him down and talked to him for a long time while waiting. Luckily my stopping him led to a good conversation with a therapist the next day, which continued through the rest of the semester. He seems to be doing really well now. I'm in RA in an upperclassman dorm, so this event didn't occur with a freshman, but rather a junior. For reference, the hall has apartments instead of typical dorm rooms, so every room has a full kitchen, a living room, 1 or 2 bathrooms, and a private bedroom for each resident. One night during my first semester as an RA, I'm doing a 2 AM round on a Friday night when I come across one of my residents in a study room. He gets my attention and tells me that his roommate has a bird in their apartment and that he doesn't want to return to his room until the bird is gone. He tells me that the roommate is letting the bird sleep in his bed and is feeding it Fruit Loops. Obviously wild animals are on the list of prohibited items, so I go knock on the door of the apartment to deal with the situation. As if the situation wasn't going to be weird enough to handle, the resident answers the door in his boxers. I ask him if he has a bird in his room and his face lights up as he runs to his bedroom to get it. He comes back cradling a small pigeon in his hands, then extends it to me as if the sole purpose of me knocking on his door at 2 AM was to pet his newfound companion. I say to him, I'm sorry, but you can't keep a wild bird in your apartment. My resident tries to explain to me that the bird is sick and that he needs to nurse it back to health. I again explain that wild animals are not allowed in residence halls, and domesticated animals are only allowed if approved through the DRC. My resident gets peed. He puts the bird on the ground and storms back to his room without a word. I watch the bird run around the kitchen floor for a moment, then call my resident's name to confirm that he plans on taking the bird back outside. My resident storms back into the kitchen, thankfully with pants on this time, and yells that he is going to rip the bird's freaking head off because he'll die without me. I try to convince him that there's no need to kill the bird, that it would feel better in its natural environment, and I stick around just long enough to ensure the bird was removed from the building. There were no complaints of a dead headless bird outside the building, so thankfully I don't think he followed through with his plan. That's kind of adorable, but I feel like this is the type of dude who takes shrooms and tries to jump off the building. Not an RA or a cop, but I went home one weekend and came back while my roommate was out. I had been back for 15 minutes or so when my RA knocked on my door. I opened it up and saw her staring a hole through me and finally said, we need to talk about what happened this weekend. I asked, WTF are you talking about? She said last night was unacceptable and if it happens again we'll press charges. I was pretty confused and repeated, what the frick are you talking about? I have been gone all weekend. My roommate apparently got drunk, poorly, tried to sneak in a girl after opposite gender visiting hours were over, 2 AM, and when the person at the front desk person caught him, knocked over a bunch of stuff, poured a bottle of Gatorade on the floor and told the girl run and don't look back. I laughed, but the RA didn't see the humor. I am just laughing at the idea of him upending a bottle of Gatorade all over the lobby to create a diversion. The shameless masturbator. 1. He would beat his meat with his roommate in the room, would simply climb up into his lofted bed, crank that P, without headphones, what a monster, and choke the chicken. To make things worse, he couldn't be bothered to finish in a tissue. He would CM on the infamous blue plastic mattress underneath his sheets, and leave IT there. 2. He would buff his banana while sitting at his desk, arrive at completion, and leave his gunk in the keyboard tray. He apparently had an aversion to seeming in acceptable locations. 3. Our hall had a pumpkin carving program for Halloween, and instead of carving a jack-o'-lantern he carved a hole to stick his dong in. According to his roommate, this poor pumpkin was molested on many different occasions. 4. The culmination of his wacky adventures ended with him tooting his horn with the door open to the hallway. His floormate took one look, threw up in the hallway, and then attempted to beat the crap out of him. Eventually the kid was moved. His desk and mattress were quite literally condemned. I've been in RA for 4 years and have many an amusing story, but this is one I will never forget. This mouse is looking for friends in the comments. Comment mouse boy to befriend him. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.